Welcome everyone. My name is John Mead with Adventure 16. For some of you who don't know, Adventure 16 is back. Some of you didn't know it went away, but it didn't go away for a year or so. Just a plug for just a second. It's not the Adventure 16 that you do at one point. We don't sell gear anymore. We'll let other people battle that out. We just sell products that inspire people to have fun and to get outdoors. So that's what we're about. One of the things we do is put on these programs periodically on Wednesday nights. So if you're not on our mailing list, make sure you get on our mailing list at adventure16.com. And you can hear about when we're doing our Wild Wednesday. We'll take the summer off because it gets hot in this facility. But Helix Brewing, Cameron Ball, who's the owner and the brewmaster here, I've known him since before he was born. You can figure that out. He's an avid outdoors person and avid trail runner. And he gives us this space to be able to do these kinds of things because he knows how important it is to teach people and inspire them to get outdoors. And that's why we're here tonight. I want to thank Cameron and his staff, the team here at Helix Brewing, for allowing us to do this. So if you need another beer, that's what they're in the business to do, is sell beer. So please patronize them if you're so inclined to have a beer. Cameron doesn't believe in selling anything other than beer and other than water. As Lori found, I think we do have water. So if you need a glass of water, you can get one out of the drinking fountain that's over next door. For those of you who have been at Wild Wednesdays at Helix and at the presentations at A16 before we closed down the stores, you know that we regularly do presentations, and we typically do presentations that are, how-tos and where to goes, and that's all great and that's really important. But every now and then we get an opportunity to do not a how-to, but a why. And why should we do these kinds of things, and what inspires us to go and do these things? So tonight we're going to be able to get a why, and we're going to hear James Gibson talk about his why and how it changed his life and what inspired him to do it in the first place. I'm not going to tell the story. You are. We are delighted to have you here tonight, James. Author, avid hiker, my friend, James Gibson.
Well, first of all, let me thank all of you for coming, but also thanks to John. And I was a longtime A16 customer. I was associated with 2 Boy Scout troops and a Jamboree troop, 2 Jamboree troops actually, over the years, and bought all kinds of stuff from A16. And it was a sad day when he closed down. I understand why he did, but I'm glad to be a part of what A16 is now, and I'm honored to be able to talk on tonight. My talk is a bit different. I got a question or two to ask. Do we have anybody here who's done the PCT or the AT? All of it? No. Wow. I should have invited a few more of my friends. Well, the JMT. Has anybody done the JMT? I know one hand that's going to go up. Oh yeah, there we go. Okay. Well, the JMT is not trivial by any stretch, but it's only about 10% of the length of the PCT. But it does go over some of the highest, roughest parts of what is the PCT. It shares the same trail, as many of you know. I could never do the PCT myself, even though psychologically I would love to do the PCT, although my wife would probably kill me, disappearing for 6 months, because I've had so many injuries to my feet, below my knees. It's like a train wreck. As John said, tonight is not a travelogue. There'll be pictures, there'll be photographs, but it won't be of the famous places on the JMT. And there's no how-tos. What it is I'm going to tell some stories. I'm going to relate some history of the JMT that you may or may not be aware of. I'm going to read you excerpts from my book. I struggled with this, and I finally decided that the best way to relate what I went through was to read you what I wrote. Some of it I wrote on the trail. I certainly took notes on the trail. I write a little differently. Most of this book was written in bars and hotel rooms and airplanes with lots of noise and people around. And when I was writing in places like at home, I always have headphones on and a little adult beverage and music. And if you're interested later, I'll tell you what the music was. It was very consistent. But so I write a little bit differently. But mostly tonight is to tell you about my personal journey. It was truly a retreat to the JMT. Let me get my clicker here. First of all, before I get into the story, I have a question. And I don't expect anyone to answer, so don't get nervous. You don't have to slouch down or anything like that. Let me see if I can make this work. What would you do if you were not afraid? It's a pretty basic question. It's a question that most people shy away from, or they're not honest about it. They don't tell the truth, even to themselves. It's kind of scary, which is kind of ironic. But that's a big, big question. That is what I'm going to talk to you about tonight, is what I did when I decided to take on what would I do if I wasn't afraid. And that's what started this whole process. Fears and phobias. Everybody's got them, okay? Give me a few fears and they don't necessarily need to be yours. Just anybody, fears and phobias that are common out there.
Public speaking.
Fortunately, I don't suffer from that. I've done public speaking my entire life. In fact, the people I rode over with said, "Oh, James, are you nervous?" I said, "Are you kidding me? I've got a room full of people that are drinking beer, and I get to tell them stories. What could be better?" So anyway, okay, public speaking. What else? Come on. Performing, okay. Anybody else? Heights. Remember that one. We're going to come back to that one. Anybody else? Failure. Excellent. Getting hurt.
Hiking long hikes on your own.
Very good.
Can't do that on my own.
Yes, I'm going to touch on that. Hiking alone is a big one for a lot of people, and I'm going to talk about that.
Grizzly bears.
Grizzly bears. Fortunately, there aren't any in California. But anything else?
Mountain lions.
Mountain lions. I'm not going to talk about that tonight, but I did have a one-on-one close-up encounter with a mountain lion on the John Muir.
Running out of food.
Pardon?
Running out of food.
No, that never was a problem. Frankly, the backpackers will laugh. Usually, no matter how hard you try, you take more. When you get home, you're dumping stuff out on the floor going, "Why did I take all of this? I didn't eat it." So that's typically not a problem. Other ones, the common ones, snakes and closed places and all of these things. Pardon? Heat exhaustion. Drink more. There you go. But so for me, it's heights. Somebody mentioned heights. That's very high on my list. This guy in this picture, that's not me, by the way. If I was up there, that's top of Half Dome. If I was up there, I'd be on my stomach, kind of going out on my hands and knees and going, well, it's 10 feet over there's the edge. This is good enough, So heights are a big one for me. I get nervous driving over high bridges. That sounds really silly, but it's true. I go over the Coronado Bridge and I kind of go, okay, how fast can I get over this bridge? It's totally irrational, but it's true. I went to the top of the Empire State Building once. I did not take this picture, by the way. I wouldn't have had the courage to do it. But I made it up, and I made it down, and I was very happy when I was down. I did the Eiffel Tower. The engineers will tell you, well, it's designed to move in the wind. And I said, well, that's peachy for you, but I'm leaving. I'm going back down again. So anyway, but let's talk a little bit more about the outdoors and a nature type of thing. I'm sure everyone knows what this is. This is Half Dome in Yosemite. The cliffs in Yosemite are awesome. Talk about heights. I'm not a rock climber. I'm not a mountain climber. I walk up mountains. I don't scale them, okay? But Half Dome has always fascinated me. And so I'm going to give you a little history. This is the common routes up Half Dome. This is the original northwest face route. And does anybody know when this was first done? Most people don't realize that I'm not 25. It seems fairly recent to me. It was a guy named Royal Robbins in 1955, started out with two other guys to climb Half Dome, to be the first to do the northwest face. They didn't last very long. The way he put it, he said, what was the quote? The vertical vastness cowed us. And they turned around and went back down again. But 2 years later, in 1957, he took off with two guys. And I love this. This was considered sophisticated equipment in 1957. It looks like string hammocks with a couple of pitons, you know. And they spent 5 days climbing the face of Half Dome, sleeping in hammocks, and they made it. They were the first to climb the northwest face of Half Dome. Over 50 years later, they made the impossible possible, is the way I put it. Over 50 years later, someone else took the impossible that nobody, they could never do that, and made it possible. And that's this guy, Alec Honnold. He walked up to Half Dome and did it free solo in 1 hour and 22 minutes. Think about that. 5 days, 1 hour and 22 minutes. Can you imagine if you had labored up the cables all day and you're on top and you're so proud of yourself and boom, up pops Alex. And you go, what the heck? And he goes, hi, where'd you come from? Oh, down there. When'd you leave? Oh, 1 hour or so ago. So an extraordinary individual, obviously, extraordinary rock climber, has an incredible ability to deal with his fear. They've actually done studies of his brain, and he has a different kind of a brain for fear. And it's very unique, and it's how he can do this. So, but I'm not Royal Robbins, and I'm not Alex Honnold. Most people aren't. So, you're probably wondering, why all the Half Dome stories? It's not even on the John Muir Trail. Well, this is Eleanor Roosevelt, maybe one of the greatest first ladies in our history. And I read a quotation of hers when I was starting this whole thing. And she said, you gain strength, courage, and confidence by every experience in which you really stop to look fear in the face. You are able to say to yourself, I have lived through this horror. I can take the next thing that comes along. You must do the thing you think you cannot do. Incredible words of wisdom there. So, what happened? My son, who's sitting back there, my eldest son, walked into my office one day and he said, Dad, we're going to try and get a permit to climb the cables on Half Dome. Who's done the cables? Yeah, 6 or 8 people. I had run away from this hike for 40 years because of my fear of heights. I'd looked at Half Dome countless times and wondered, God, what's it like up there? I'd gone around the back and looked. And I'd always had a reason, I'd always had an excuse not to do it. My son comes in and asks me the simple question, and I go to myself, I guess it's time. So I said, sure, sign me up. Well, he got a permit. So, that dodge was over. So I had to find a way to deal with this. So what I did is I started out every day and I ended every day looking at photographs of the cables on Half Dome as a way to try and desensitize myself to what I was going to be faced with when I got there. So I got there, there's the first view of the cables, and I kind of went, oh my goodness, what am I doing here? And we got to the base of the cables, and those of you who've been there know there's the pile of gloves and people kind of going, well, I don't know. There was two couples, young couples, next to my two sons and my oldest son's best friend as we got to the base, and one of them looks at the other guy and he said, "I think the view's just fine right here." And I said, "Oh, I can't do that." So I looked at my youngest son, who's not here, and I said, "Well, let's go. You start, I'll follow." And my oldest son was right behind me. Long story short, we started up the cables, and they tell you, well, it's not a cliff. It's at the most, it's about, I think, 60 degrees vertical. It's 400 feet total, and I think the last 200 feet is pretty stiff. And so I'll never forget my oldest son, who's sitting back there probably laughing right now, and he said, "Dad, look at the view." And I'm going, "I'll look at the view when I get to the top, because I know that if I look at the view, I'm going to turn into granite and I won't move. I'll be too scared to go up or down." But we did make it, and there we are on top. We enjoyed about an hour and a half up there. I will probably never go back. Once was enough. But it was one of those special days. We came down. I actually fell and slipped on some scree on the way down to the valley, and I hurt my knee pretty badly, and I also started to tear my Achilles, although I didn't realize it at the time. That only fully tore about 2 days later. But it was quite an experience. We went back to the cabin we'd rented in Wawona, which had a hot tub. We sat in the hot tub and had beer. And I'm going to read you an excerpt from my book. In retrospect, this day was more than just a long and spectacular hike. So much more. We often miss the import of moments like this when they occur. It is only later, when our vision is clear, that we recognize their importance. My knee recovered, although it still gives me a twinge now and then, but the more serious injury, a torn Achilles tendon, began that day, only to fully tear a few days after completing the hike. 2 years of recovery lay ahead, often painful and frustrating, but I did not know it this day. No, little did I know, sitting in the warmth of that hot tub, beer in hand, enjoying the company of some of the finest young men I know, that I would look back on this day as a major life lesson, more than a day in which I faced my fear of heights and pushed through. More importantly, I learned not to settle. Even if the unknown is terrifying, the present can be worse. And if you take a chance, the future can be full of wonders, incredible new people, and experiences you cannot even imagine. You just need the courage to start walking. The lesson learned on Half Dome that day in August led me to make a profound change in my life little more than a year later. I would divorce, begin to build a new and better future with whatever time I have left to experience the beauty of life. We all have an expiration date, and I decided I did not want to just expire with a remote in my hand. It was scary, worse than Half Dome, full of twists and turns, intense pain, both physical and psychological, deeply spiritual moments, highs of complete ecstasy, joy, and wonder, plus periods of deep self-reflection before I firmly became established on a new trail. That journey is what I want to talk to you about tonight in the time I have left. But it all started on the cables at Half Dome. I like to say that the mountains are my gym and my church. John Muir has probably not one of his more famous quotes, but he said, I'd rather be in the mountains thinking about God than in church thinking about the mountains. And that pretty much sums it up for me. There is a deeply spiritual aspect to my journey. I am a Christian. I'm religious, although I'm not a churchgoer. So if anything I say out there offends anyone who doesn't agree with it, I'm sorry. But just insert whatever you see as a higher power, and if you don't, just ignore it, and hopefully you'll take something from my story. I'm going to read you a few excerpts from the journal I wrote in the bar, because it leads up to what happened on the John Muir Trail and what I went through to get prepared for the trail. And they're dated. I'm not going to, it's just, it's by no means the whole journal. You can buy the book. But January 28th, and imagine I'm sitting in a bar in Poway writing all of this. As I grappled with this adventure I'm planning on the John Muir, the thought of going alone initially frightened me. Who said alone? Right there. So I tried to find a partner. Alas, the handful of people I approached either could not or would not take on this kind of commitment. Maybe it was a sign. The more I thought about it, I realized that for some reason I'm being called to do it alone. I must overcome and conquer my fears. This is a retreat. February 2nd. I've begun to embrace what is going to be a solitary retreat, but I confess to fear and anxiety, which I think is healthy and will make me humble. However, I get the feeling most people think a rational human being simply would not feel the urge to put 35 pounds on their back and walk into the wilderness for the better part of a month by themselves. In truth, I'm not sure I totally understand it, but I know I must do this. I checked this morning and discovered if I am fortunate enough to start on my target date of August 17th, there will be no moon. It will be incredibly and completely dark on my first nights alone on the trail. Is this a metaphor for my journey of self-discovery and spiritual awakening? As I progress along the trail, the moon will grow in size and brightness, leading my way through the Sierra until it will wane completely as I near the end, when I will have to depend on his light and, perhaps, my increased self-knowledge and wisdom to guide me. As I contemplated this in the late afternoon, I took some solace that I truly feel closer to God than I have in many years, and I simply need to trust in Him to protect and guide me. This is a leap of faith, but one I know I will ultimately have to take, especially those first few nights when I bed down in total darkness and solitude, far from civilization. I will be testing both my faith and my personal courage, challenging myself and confronting my fears head on. For as a species, we are wired to be afraid of the dark and being alone. That is partially what this trek is about, the need to push myself, physically and mentally, but also the need to stop and listen for what He is going to say to me. I am simultaneously scared and excited about what I may learn on the mountaintops and in the quiet meadows once trod by Muir himself. I am not ready yet, but I feel confident I will be when the moment comes to take those first steps. February 22nd. Becoming whole was how an old friend described the process I am going through. And the more I thought about it, the more evident it became that she has described the essence of this journey: physical, mental, and spiritual, all pieces of one complete being that need to be in alignment to be whole. None of these three stages are easy, but I am finding the degree of difficulty increases as I move from one to the next. Physical was not easy, but in fact is straightforward. Don't eat junk and exercise. Mental is a big part of the reason I decided to move in a completely new direction. It's much scarier than eating right and exercising, but taking back control of my life and eliminating the environmental things that were destroying my health were critical. Eliminating the stress involved drastic changes in my life. And looking back, I am surprised I had the courage, for I remember how terrified I was as I took the first steps. But the third, spiritual, is by far the toughest. And probably because I've just realized that while the essence of the first two is taking control, the only way to achieve the third is to relinquish control. It is, in some ways, a contradiction. To make progress, I needed to take control, but to reach a spiritual fullness, I need to let go of that very control I have worked so hard to assert in the last year. Talk about hiking alone. I was scared of it. And I'm going to read you what happened one day. It was a Sunday in Poway, and I had an incredible experience that I didn't plan on. I had an incredible opportunity today, and I almost missed it. Driving early this morning in a pouring rain, I lamented the fact that there would be no hiking today because of the weather. I stopped and thought for a minute as I paused at a red light, my windshield wiper slapping back and forth. It struck me what an incredibly rare opportunity was staring me right in the face. If only I had the will to embrace it. We in San Diego are spoiled. We live in probably the most perfect climate in the country. Today was a perfect opportunity to experience something totally different from the norm, for I could hike in the rain and test my rain gear in conditions I might face on the JMT. But I was faced with a basic fear: hiking alone. As much as I've written about my realization that I need to hike alone to have a personal and self-directed retreat on the JMT, the reality of hiking alone, very alone, is still frightening to me. I am convinced that as a species, we are not designed to be alone. We are social animals who need a connection to others to feel safe, secure, and complete. I considered the possibility that if I hiked to Iron Mountain today, I would see very few, if any, fellow hikers. People in San Diego tend to think of a rainstorm the same way people in Buffalo assess a blizzard blowing off of Lake Erie. Stay home and hunker down. Suddenly, it was obvious. I had to go hiking during a winter rainstorm. I had practical reasons for making the decision: need to test my rain gear, find out if it would keep me warm and dry in preparation for my trek in the Sierra should I run into inclement weather. But I also realized I was testing my limits. I was concerned about going up the mountain on a day when few others would consider it. It was a mental hurdle I needed to overcome. I prepared, drove to the trailhead, said a prayer, and set out for the summit amid driving rain and blowing wind, temperature 43 degrees. And then a funny thing happened. I started to feel empowered, confident and comfortable, even privileged to be out on such a day. I did run into about 10 other hardy, or perhaps foolish souls over the course of 2 or 3 hours, but on a typical Sunday there would be literally hundreds of people on the same route. I summited after hiking through clouds and rain and sat on what would normally be a crowded piece of real estate completely alone. And I loved it. I took a few unremarkable pictures of clouds and wondered, what have I been so afraid of? As I descended, the wind and rain picked up dramatically, and I imagine the wind chill probably dropped the temperature into the 30s, but somehow it didn't matter. It was wonderful. I learned my gear is not perfect, an important discovery that may save me later this year, one I will correct, but more importantly, I passed a milestone by overcoming a fear. And that is what this entire process is all about. Confronting my fears, trusting in something larger than myself, giving up control, doing something uncomfortable. I almost missed the opportunity to experience this by staying within the bounds of my normalcy. Ironically enough, 2 days later, I got that email that everyone who wants to do the JMT, and most don't get this email, I got my golden ticket. I got my permit to go down the JMT. And it was, I'll never forget it. I was like, this can't be. My gosh, and I read it like 3 times, and I went, oh my gosh, I won the lottery. This is fantastic. And then I finished the day, and I got out the calendar, and I started to count the days until I'd have to take off. And I'll never forget, it was 168 days. And I went to bed that night, and I went, 168 days is not a lot of time to prepare. So about 2 or 3 weeks later, March 20th, I'm in the midst of planning. I said, what am I doing? I say to myself as I lean back in my chair at my kitchen table. Am I out of my mind? Probably. Spread out in front of me are the tools of trek planning, something I have done many times before, but not on this level. 13 scattered topo maps, a book called the John Muir Trail, my phone open to a calculator app, and in the center of it all, my iPad with a spreadsheet. It's filled with text and numbers staring back at me. Within those rows and columns is the reality of the challenge I face. A day-by-day plan for my JMT trek, where I will go each day, the mileage, elevations, potential camping sites, resupply points, cumulative mileage as I progress down the trail. I smile and remember the saying, man plans, God laughs. At this moment, I feel he's probably on the floor in convulsions. But this is my time, I slowly realize. I may be foolish, but this is my shot, and I may never get another one. The stars are aligning for me. Carpe diem. As I hiked in the late afternoon today, I told myself that somehow I would find the strength and the resolve to make it 211 plus miles. Do you ever notice they say it's 211 miles? That gets you to the top of Whitney. I got up there and I went, well, where's the escalator? Where's the zip line? You've got, what, 12, 13 more miles to go? It's not 211 miles. Trust me, it's more than that. But anyway, my Achilles tendon, the old half-dome injury, may act up. My left knee may complain. After all, I will be 63 when I start down the trail. But I will find a way to overcome these trifles. I need to have trust. He will not take me into the wilderness to fail. He wants to have a conversation. He wants to teach me something. He will make sure I make it to the classroom. I just need to have the courage to take the first step. The next month in April, I took a break from preparing and hiking, and I went to the Caribbean to sail with some very good friends of mine who have a beautiful yacht. They spend 6 months of the year cruising around the Caribbean on their yacht. And in a past life, I used to sail and race big boats, so I'm very comfortable on big sailboats. And I spent an incredible week with them. And my good friend Charlie, they saw me off at the cab at the boat dock in Antigua, and he and his wife have an incredible relationship. In fact, my wife and I just got back from spending 10 days with them in Annapolis at their place there. And he looked at me and he laughs, a big grin on his face as I'm getting into the cab, and he goes, come back, but he says, find a good woman. He knew that I wasn't meant to be alone, and I didn't want to be alone. Skip ahead a little bit. I didn't want to be alone. So, in life and on the trail, when you're alone, you're not really alone because you have memories of people, of places, of goals that you want to hit. I'm a person who names things. My backpack is Rosie, okay? There's reasons for that, I won't go into it. But I put pins on my backpack. The one with the Thunderbird is in honor of my late father, who fought in North Africa and Italy with the famed Thunderbird Division, the 45th Infantry. He was a survivor, incredible man. I learned an awful lot from him, and I didn't realize it until after he was gone, how much he taught me. The pin on the left, I was very active in Scouts, and I have 3 sons. 2 of them are Eagle Scouts. 1 just fell short. So I have I'm an Eagle Scout dad pin, because I wanted one of my sons to go with me, but they were too busy with life. They couldn't go. Below that, the bear with the Yosemite, you probably can't read it, but it says Nature Bridge. Along the way, I wanted this to be about more than an old guy stumbling down the John Muir Trail, and I hooked up with Nature Bridge, and specifically their program called Wild Link in Yosemite, which to raise money for them. People pledged money, to them for my hike, and I raised a number of thousands of dollars for them. But so I was taking the trip for Nature Link. I had and Wild Link, and the kids from the inner city who've never seen a mountain don't even know what it is. And Wild Link gets them out there for 4 to 5 days. They take them out in the backcountry with backpacks for 2 or 3 days. It's quite an incredible program. So I carried the Wild Link pin. Lastly, I had the pin with my goal, Mount Whitney. And then as a joke, at the last minute, I was in Yosemite getting ready to go, and I saw that pin. I said, well, I mustn't hike too fast or I'll kill some bears. So anyway. Now I'm going to tell you about let me back up. You'll hear about the John Muir, and everybody who goes, they take pictures of all the famous places. I'm not going to talk about the famous places. You've all seen pictures. I'm not going to bore you with pictures of them. You can find them everywhere. I'm going to tell you about some things that happened to me that were totally unexpected and really had a strong impact on me mentally and spiritually. I started the first day on the trail. I'd been on the trail less than 10 minutes. I'm going to read you the excerpt of what happened to me. Alone on the trail at last, I stretch my legs and become accustomed to the weight on my back and the feel of my boots as they trod the uneven ground of the trail, strewn with rocks and split by the roots of trees. Dodge and weave up the trail, eyes looking ahead, then down, making sure not to trip or catch my boot and fall, finding the rhythm that is so vital to successfully hiking for hours on end. My senses heighten as I listen to the ripple of the flowing creek to my right, hear the wind in the trees all around me, tune into the birds chirping above me in the branches. The trail rises, then tops out, and I look down in front of me, and there, a few feet in front of me, is a lone deer astride the trail. I stop, and we stare at each other, eye to eye, neither of us moving. Time seems to stand still. All is suddenly quiet as I tune out the sounds of the woods. Expecting her to immediately bolt and run into the woods, I am taken aback by her calmness and unwavering gaze. Neither of us move. It is like we have been turned into statues, anchored to the ground, waiting for the other to make the first move. I have come upon countless deer on many trails, but I have never had an encounter like this, for she simply stares and waits until I finally relax, smile, and say out loud, "Thank you for welcoming me to your home. I needed this." Mission accomplished. She slowly walks to my right, crosses the creek, and then turns and looks at me as if to say, "Welcome to the woods. Godspeed on your journey." I feel initiated, baptized, and blessed more than any formal church ritual could bestow. One of his creatures has been tasked with welcoming me, and I know I have passed through the doorway into my new life, and all will be well. I have come home. Well, I should back up about 2 months from when that happened. I had been dating on online services. I'd met some nice people. I had my heart broken once. And then 2 months before I took off on the trail, I met Deborah. And she's sitting back there. Raise your hand. There she is. We met online, of course. And we were starting to really connect when I left, but it was still very, very early. And, you know, I'd been burned once. This was not her first rodeo in the online world. And so I was being very, very careful. So I take off on the trip, and my second night, I'm camped at Lower Cathedral Lake. Some of you may know it. And I start to realize that she's a lot more important to me than I thought. I'm camped, I'm setting up my tent set up, and for some reason, I can't tell you why I did this, I took these objects and put them out there like a tableau so I could take a picture. And it was only later that I realized how much Deborah was reflected in this picture. Over here, she gave me a little book. It had the requisite number of pages. She had written me a message for every single day I was going to be on the trail that I could look at. She gave me a good luck charm, a little talisman, if you will, a little doll to take along. And then I had my iPad mini that I took notes on and wrote on, and I had my Garmin InReach, mostly, I thought, for marketing purposes so people that had donated to WildLink could track me on the internet and send me a message if they wanted to. But I also used it every night to text with Deborah, and we talked back and forth. I'd get in my tent, I'd get my sleeping bag, and we'd text for 5, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever. But it was a connection. And then she pointed out to me, actually just today, when I was telling her what I was going to say, "That's a bottle of scotch." And she said, "Well, I love scotch." And I went, you know, I hadn't thought about that. But so the whole picture is Deborah, and it was It was actually subconscious. I didn't really think about it when I did it, but she was getting to be more and more important to me. It's that alone thing. So I went to bed in my tent. That's the sunset at Lower Cathedral Lake. And I slept well. And I woke up the next morning, and I'm going to read you what happened the next morning. The light is dim, but insistent. The day is beginning. I turn in my sleeping bag. As I sit up inside my tent, it hits me. It is quiet, very quiet, almost eerie. The silence is unsettling. No birds, no sound of water, no wind, nothing. Complete silence, or as close as possible in the backcountry. It makes me wonder if something, or someone, now silent, woke me up. The primal instinct runs deep, and I am suddenly totally awake, on alert. It is cold. I dress, pull on my boots, and slowly put on my down jacket in the confined space of my tent. I listen carefully, but no sound breaks the air. The sound of the zipper as I open my tent is jarring in the early morning stillness. I crawl out of my tent, stand up, and whisper, "Wow." A mystical, ethereal, almost spiritual scene is before me. I am in church, my church, the place that subconsciously called to me these past months, as quiet as any medieval cathedral I have visited, and more majestic. On this morning, the ledge above Lower Cathedral Lake is truly a holy place, a Sierra holy place. The light has an almost purplish tint as I gaze across the large flat rock surface littered with blocks of huge granite, glacial erratics. They float in the slight mist that hugs the ground. I carefully, slowly walk among them, listening to the silence. It is odd, but somehow I feel like an intruder. I'm not yet ready. I sit down and soak in the scene. Close my eyes, listen. Allow my entire being to participate, to become one with my surroundings. This is why I came, to listen, to be open, to learn, to grow, perhaps to heal. Physically, mentally, spiritually. I sit alone, eyes closed, listening to the silence, perched on a rock among my granite companions. My eyes open to the glow of first light, the completely still, mist-covered surface of Lower Cathedral Lake below me, the first rays of sunshine touching the summit of Cathedral Peak behind me in the chill air. My life has been a stressful, hot mess for almost 2 years. Divorce, blowing up your life, even when you choose it, is a scary and lonely journey. I spent months preparing, planning, anticipating my escape to the JMT. But now is a moment to be in the present. For the first time in many months, sitting in the midst of the Sierra Cathedral, the fear begins to fall away, and I realize I can do this. Moving on, starting over. Perhaps I needed complete silence and solitude to begin a reset. But looking back, I think this, the beginning of my third day on the JMT, is the moment the personal healing began, when I began to truly believe I was going to be okay, not just on the trail, but in life. Sitting in the early morning light on a mist-covered ledge, I turned a page and started a new chapter. That day, I was bound for Lyle Canyon. That's where I was going to camp that night. And I had to go through Tuolumne Meadows. And probably many of you know there was a grill in Tuolumne Meadows. Excuse me a minute. And I pointed to that grill and I said, I know I can get bacon and eggs. And that sounds really, really good. So I pushed hard to get to the grill. But I had another reason. I had also had the hope of maybe making a connection. And that's what I'm going to read about right now. I finished my breakfast, then checked my phone to see how the reception looks. On most of the JMT, cell service is completely out of the question, but I have heard it might be possible here. But it is weak, painfully so. I stand up, begin walking around, holding it up in the air, somehow hoping to capture that random signal that will allow me to make a phone call. I walk to the road, and it's stronger. Encouraged, I look both ways. No traffic. I walk into the road and gain a bar of reception, fleeting between 1 and an occasional jump to 2. The dreaded no service message has disappeared. I look both ways. Standing on the dotted line in the middle of the road, no traffic. The dancing magic of the second bar is irresistible. And I give in to temptation, the possibility of pain or joy waiting on the other end of my tenuous digital connection. That civilization thing. The phone rings, and Deborah answers. It is a strange but brief conversation as I struggle to maintain the signal, now dodging the occasional approaching car as I straddle the center line of this little ribbon of blacktop. Temptation makes us do strange and sometimes dangerous things. I try to explain my situation, apologize that I may disappear in a heartbeat, either the victim of a fading signal or a speeding vehicle. It is over almost before it begins. And she later tells me she has no memory of the call. Although she denies that. I will just interject, she denies that. But I remember it was joy and not pain, and it still makes me smile. The fleeting digital connection has provided the possibility of a future human one, dare I imagine it. On this day, I needed that, for I have begun to look forward. The past is receding, finally. Well, to finish out, people ask me, how long did it take you to do the John Muir? And I said, well, I was going to do it in 28 days, but it took me 5 years. And the reason is I was about 9 or 10 days in, and I was camped at Squaw Lake, which is on the cover of my book. It's a picture I took just as the sun was setting, my last night on the JMT, although I did not know it at the time. And in 2015, it was one of the largest fires in California history, which seems small now. It was the Rough Fire. And it was burning in the south, in Kings Canyon, and it had effectively closed the John Muir Trail. And I was still wrestling with whether or not I was going to quit, where I was going to get out, and all of this kind of stuff. But I'd pretty much given in that I probably was going to have to get out. I woke up at 4 in the morning, and my friend Dick, who's back there, he had joined me for a couple of days. And I woke him up at 4 in the morning because I had altitude sickness. I was in Scouts with Glenn White, who's sitting back there, for many years, and we were taught endlessly with outdoor survival and wilderness first aid and all of this stuff to take care of the Scouts and make sure they got home. And I knew what was going on. And it wasn't just, nausea and a headache. I had the chest issue. And my heart was pounding. And I got up and I walked around and realized that I needed to get out. Long story short, that Garmin that I used for marketing saved me, because the only way to get out was over 2 very high passes, which you wouldn't want to do in that condition, and there was no other thing to do. So I hit the button, I got helicoptered out. Deborah, who I'd known for 2 months, was not on my emergency list. My oldest son, who's sitting back there, he got the phone call at 6 in the morning. Being a guy, he said, Dad's got it. I'm going to work. He's fine. The other person was my assistant, who was on the list, and she had met Deborah at a concert in Coronado like a week or 10 days earlier. We'd run into them, she and her then boyfriend, on a Sunday afternoon, and they'd hit it off and they'd shared information. She gets the call, and she sprung into action and said, well, Deborah ought to know about this. So she called her, and the next thing I know, I'm sitting in the meadow waiting for a chopper at 5:30 in the morning, and my inReach starts exploding with text messages. Long story short, I got helicoptered out. It's that heights thing. One of the things I never wanted to do was ride in a helicopter. Well, I did. And anyway, right over the fire, it was spectacular. It was amazing to see this. And by now, Deborah knew what was going on, and she faced one of her fears. This is a woman, and I did not know this, who hates to drive alone long distances. Can't stand it. She heard what had happened to me. She got in her car. She said, I called in sick to work. She got in her car and she drove, 6, 7, 8 hours to Fresno, to the hospital. They checked me out. I was fine. And the doctor said, yeah, it was probably altitude sickness, might have been brought on by the smoke, et cetera, but there's no predicting this. But you're fine. So I waited for her because she told me she was coming. Well, we met. I'm 9 or 10 days dirty on the trail. And we saw each other down the hallway. It's the old movie thing. We ran to each other, and we've been together ever since. So that was the end of my first year. I had other strange things happen, and I'm going to focus on a couple of them before I finish this up. The second year, Deborah took me back to the trailhead where I would rejoin the JMT, and I had my doubts about my ability to continue. I had overtrained. I've had a lot of injuries, and I was in pain. My Achilles was nagging at me. I wasn't sure if I could do this, but I had to try. And I had set myself up so I was planning to finish the JMT, and we were going to get married in late September. So I get on the trail, kind of like the deer. In the first 10 minutes, I saw this next to the trail. And I went, you know what? It's going to be okay. No matter what happens, it's going to be okay. I don't know who put that there, but it was perfect. And I don't believe in coincidence. I think it was there for a reason. And that was very, very strange. I'm going to go into just a little bit of history because it's important to the story. Does anyone know who this is? It's not a young John Muir. I'll just give you a hint. Has anyone ever heard of Theodore Solomons? I hadn't either until I started to research this. Theodore Solomons is the father of the John Muir Trail. He was an original charter member of the Sierra Club along with John Muir and others. He did a lot of exploring in the Sierras, but the one he's most famous for is in 1895, he took off from what's now Florence Lake to try and find a way to Kings Canyon. And when he was growing up as a boy, his mother, I won't bore you with the whole story, but he was sent to his uncle's farm in Fresno, and he's working in the fields, and he saw the snow-capped mountains, and he had this idea that it would be fun to go up there and to find a trail along those mountains. And that was the birth of the John Muir Trail. He was one of the big proponents of a trail from Yosemite south on the highest points in the Sierra, Theodore Solomons. So he took off in 1895 in ground that hadn't really been explored much. John Muir had not been there, from Florence Lake down. And he and Bonner, who accompanied him not because of his experience or his great desire to be outdoors, but simply because I think Solomons didn't want to be alone, and Bonner's schedule was free, so he went with it. They did not take pack mules, which was very unusual in those days, because he didn't want to be hindered by where he could go, because a mule couldn't go there. So they started out, and if you've done the JMT, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. The bridge that was snowed out here, that came out about a week or 10 days ago, it's right there crossing the San Joaquin. You start there, and you go up the South Fork of the San Joaquin River, and you cross it one more time, and then you climb up to Evolution Valley. You come to Evolution Creek, which is, I laughingly say it's a creek, it's a roaring rapid, God knows what it is right now. And so you get up to Evolution Valley and then on to Evolution Basin. Solomons did this trek with Bonner, discovered the way to Kings Canyon, and he named all of those places. He mapped, he took photographs, he had glass plate negatives with him. And he returned and was a hero in the Sierra Club, made a big presentation, showed his photographs, and believe it or not, he never went back. He went to Alaska. It's quite a story, I won't bore you with it, but many years later, he's back. He's built a house all by himself west of Yosemite near El Portal, and he gets a letter from a scout troop He's 63 years old, same age I was when I started on this. And they're inviting him to go on a trip with them on the part of the trail that he and Bonner pioneered. And he's overweight, he's out of shape, but he says, I'll go. And he goes. And it has an incredible impact on him. He loses 35 pounds, that's the physical side, but he also revisits the place that he called sublime. And he named all those places for the scientists of evolution because they were important, they understood nature. And so that's why you have Darwin and Wallace and Huxley remembered up in Evolution Valley and Evolution Basin. And they're called that because they were all evolutionary scientists. You could use his map today with no problem. It's remarkable. So here he is with the Boy Scouts at 63 in Evolution Basin. And if you look at pictures of Evolution Basin, you can pick that mountain out right away. But it's a remarkable story. Next guy I met, his name is Dario. He is the ranger at McClure Meadow in Evolution Valley. Dario in this picture is 72 years old. He's been a seasonal ranger for 46 years. He's legendary in the Sierra. I did not know that. I met him at his cabin. I ended up spending several hours with him in the course of 2 days, and he told me stories I couldn't even believe about the Sierra. This guy has forgotten more about the Sierra backcountry than any of us probably collectively will ever know. And it struck me as I listened to him that I had an epiphany, I guess. This is a guy who has spent most of his life up there. And he told me things about the backcountry and the people and what it was like to be up there. And I started to realize and understand John Muir a lot more about the fact that this is almost a living, breathing thing that we're going down. Some people, I was talking to somebody earlier, people try and do it in like 8 days, and I go, why? You know, enjoy it. Dario was really important. He gave me a perspective. So I left Dario, had lunch with him, and I started up Evolution Valley on my way to Evolution Basin. And I saw these guys. And I'm going to read you a little excerpt. Between my path and the incredible green hues of the meadow are large expanses of nearly flat, smooth granite that have somehow survived the ravages of time. And seemingly thrown across these rock slabs, like some giant child had thrown pebbles on the ground, are countless boulders and rocks of all sizes that seem incongruous by their very presence. These are glacial erratics, some as big as a car, others smaller but no less imposing in their solitude. Quiet, solid, resting, a state that belies their violent past. Once contained within the massive ice sheets that covered much of the Sierra thousands of years ago, they were dropped by the melting and receding glaciers. I've seen them often, but they still amaze me, and with my growing consciousness of the living Sierra, they seem to speak to me as I look out on their quiet perch, stranded on the granite platform, left behind and forgotten, somehow forlorn and lonely, but with a quiet majesty. Left behind as remnants of the glacier that once covered this ground and carved out the valley, they stand as a reminder of the constantly changing nature of our planet, our climate, our environment, deposited here long before humans even existed on Earth, much less walked through this valley. In the grand scheme of things, these erratics remind me of how inconsequential we are, pushing back the narcissistic tendencies modern life seems to encourage and foster. Everyone gets a trophy. Everyone is special. But looking out upon these abandoned glacial passengers, looking out across time in this remote place, it is clear I am but a grain of sand on a beach, flying through the universe on a small planet, lost among the infinity of the stars, and only for the flicker of an eye in the grand scheme of time. These erratics will still be here after I am gone, probably long after humans are gone. But today, we had a brief conversation. They whispered to me as I stopped to gaze across the expanse of the rock-littered granite to the meadow beyond, and I heard them. I listened and began to understand the mountains and myself in a way I had never experienced before. I got to the end of Evolution Valley, and I knew that I wasn't going to make it to the end. My Achilles was bothering me, and there was just no way that this was going to work. But for some reason, as I sat there and ate my lunch, I said, you know what? I'm not quite done. Believe it or not, I even looked at my backpack and I said, Rosie, we got one more climb to make. There's something that's telling me we got one more climb to make today. Here's what happened. Some places you hear about all your life, but when you see them, they are mildly disappointing. Like a hyped up movie or a book that is somehow a letdown, our expectations outstrip reality, but Evolution Basin is not such a place. The reality exceeds expectations, if that is possible. Sublime, a word that attempts to express all that is exalted, awe-inspiring, majestic, wonderful, even venerated in a spiritual sense. Theodore Solomons was inspired to name this place and the surrounding mountains in honor of those great men of science who he described as, quote, at one in their devotion to the sublime in nature. Now I understand. After finding a place to camp in the rocks above Evolution Lake, I make my dinner and find a place to sit and eat on a massive slab of granite overlooking the lake, with the mountain masterpiece of his creation spread before me. The stark rocky peaks surround me, and the distant mountains at the end of the basin reflect the light of the setting sun as it filters through the shifting clouds. The light changes almost minute to minute, the colors and shadows putting on a show as I eat my simple freeze-dried dinner out of a pouch and reflect on how I have journeyed to this spot, this time. I'm going to point something out. Look right in the middle of the picture. That's what I'm going to talk to you about. I gaze out across the lake to a ridge, equal in height to where I'm sitting, and my eyes fixate on a rock, a lonely glacial erratic perched high atop a ridge, which almost seems to glow golden. It stands alone in the early evening light as the sun begins to set to the west, a lone sentinel left by a receding glacier, the last erratic. It is almost as though we are staring at each other. Both of us have reached the end of our respective journeys. His resting place determined thousands of years ago by the retreating glacier, mine by the ache in my Achilles tendon. And then the conversation begins between that last erratic and me, high in the Sierra, an eon and a lifetime from where we each began. Sublime, exalted, awe-inspiring, wonderful, majestic, venerated, spiritual. The words cascade through my head amid a tumble of emotion as I watch the quietly changing light and mood of the mountains at my feet. Not one for formal church attendance, I often say the mountains are my gym and my church, and I feel closest to God when I rest on a mountain peak. As I sit on a slab of granite above Evolution Lake, I realize I have entered perhaps the most beautiful cathedral on earth. And the lesson, the reason for my journey, is right in front of me, for he is speaking directly to me, and it is a simple message. I suddenly know I am finished. My physical journey, my spiritual quest is over. My heart and soul are open, and I hear the message. Of course, I have been reminded of how important people are, for I have met wonderful people on the trail. But more importantly, I've seen and felt how we are all tied together, regardless of color, social strata, age, or experience, how we all need each other. More difficult to experience is oneness with nature, that essence of returning to the roots of humanity, now lost to the comforts of civilization. Perhaps one must feel pain, fatigue, and discomfort, be worn down to hear properly, to understand without distraction the spiritual side of the mountains, to learn from the rivers and streams, and finally, to converse with an erratic and the larger forces that have put both of us high in this remote part of the Sierra. Well, my trip did end there that year. I took 3 more years to finish the John Muir Trail. I don't have time. I'm way past time already. John's probably going, what the hell is he doing? And I did make it to the top of Mount Whitney. So in closing, I want to leave you with a couple of thoughts. I want to read from the end of my book. What would you do if you were not afraid? Perhaps the ultimate question. I had faced it. Doing what terrified me, overcoming my fear of heights and climbing the half-dome cables, leaving my marriage, being alone, backpacking solo. All of it has made my life infinitely richer. The safety of the recliner and remote beckoned, but I turned away. Navigating the switchbacks as I reached the end of my journey, I realized that in the last 5 years, I have experienced a lifetime of highlights, more than many people after decades of life, because I had the courage to face my fears. I will be at peace if my last breath comes at Whitney Portal. No regrets. But now is the time for a new beginning. I am truly blessed, for I have time to continue walking through life. I am but a couple of miles from Whitney Portal when coming up the trail to greet me and accompany me to the finish line is Deborah, my wife, my best friend, my love, my soulmate. 5 years earlier, at the beginning of my adventure, I had held my phone hopefully to the sky, searching for reception, for a connection, longing to hear her voice, wondering if she might be a part of my future. Today, we walk to the finish line of my very personal journey together, the end of my solo odyssey, for I am no longer alone. It is the beginning of our life together. And we've had lots of adventures. I could spend a whole night talking about those. But I want to tell you about it was a song that I heard after I got back, and it was talking about change and how people are scared to make changes in their life and to face their fears. And the refrain of the song haunted me, and it said to the person who was doubting, it said, "Don't be late for your life." Think about that. Don't be late for your life. Royal Robbins, the first man to climb Half Dome, the northwest face. You can read it, but it says, "Before the deed comes the thought, before the achievement comes the dream. Every mountain we climb, we first climb in our mind." This is an incredible quote, and I'm a big believer in visualization. I visualized for 6 years what it would be like to walk up to the top of Mount Whitney. I'd been there twice before, so I knew what it looked like, but I visualized it. I got back from one of my years on the trail, and Deborah asked me, "What do you think about? You're alone all the time." And I said, "Well, lots of things." I said, "On this trip, I spent an entire day trying to figure out what I would say to a group of people, because my dream at that point was to finish the book and to do public speaking and to share my story and to do more writing, which I'm working on. You're my visualization. This is the first time I have told this story in front of a group. I visualized this on the trail. This is my Mount Whitney, too, right here. So I thank you for being here. I'm gonna bounce back to one more thing. I'm gonna return to the original question. You've had time to think about it. I'm not gonna call on you, but I would ask that you think about it. Maybe it's not an outdoor adventure. Maybe it's a personal relationship that you need to mend, but you're scared of it. Maybe it's a goal that you're a little scared of. It's not possible. I couldn't do that. I have excuses for everything. I would ask that you think about that. And in the words of Royal Robbins, dream. Dream about it. And just maybe you won't wake up. You'll make your dream. And so that is what I would wish for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, James. I mean, it's an incredible feat to do the John Muir Trail, to hike the John Muir Trail, whether it's a year or 5 years or 10 years or a lifetime, but to also turn around and write a book about it. I mean, that's amazing to me. I mean, I don't. How many of you have written a book in here? Lori, yes, 2, okay, 3. Very few. That's an incredible accomplishment. I know Lori's written a book, and we hope to get her to come back and talk about her story, unintended consequences of hiking, and we're going to that because this is James Knight's, but hopefully we'll get you to come and tell that story, tell your story. Anyway, incredible job tonight, and writing that book is amazing. So, a couple of things that are good news. If you want to watch this again, Mike over here, who is A16's archivist, filmmaker, great guy. He'll also hook up AT&T's internet for your at your house, and Mike is also incredibly talented individual. He is working on a documentary about Adventure 16, and I think you're probably into about 200 or 300 hours worth of filming. We're going to get down to what, 15, 20 minutes? I don't know. Anyway, Mike has filmed this tonight, and we'll be posting this on our website, James Talk Tonight, on the website probably in a few weeks. So you can watch it again or tell your friends to watch it. And if you want to know the rest of the story, as James said, he'll be over here at the bar and maybe sucking on the beer and signing books and chatting to you. So thank you all for coming, and hopefully we've been inspired to do some basic things and to go out there and do something because you were thought of it. Thank you.
Thanks for hosting.
My pleasure.